Hi, I'm Rebecca Ibel. I am at Contemporary Art Matters in Columbus, Ohio. The exhibition Sculpture One is a group show featuring works by a variety of artists, including the one and only Jonathan Hammer, my friend for many years. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. I can see you. You look lovely.
Thank you, as do you. And you see I
I
have some beautiful art behind me.
love the sculptures so much. And I also have art behind me.
I met Jonathan through Billy Sullivan and Klaus Curtis in the 90s when you were living in San Francisco, and my family and I grew up out there, so would go out and visit. And we've been working together on and off for many years. And so I am thrilled to have some of your new works, and I won't go into a history of all of the work of Jonathan Hammer, but I do have lots to ask you about and talk to you about, and I'm thrilled. You're one of the smartest people I know, and your work is so sensitive and generous, and while art can be sort of that window to the outside world and a mirror to your own insides and thoughts and what it means to be human sometimes. I wanted to talk about your background a tiny bit. You studied bookbinding, and how did that inform you, and did it give you some sort of sense of just strange materials to work with to express your ideas?
Yes, absolutely. But first, let me say to you that meeting the first time when you were in your 20s and you had bright red sneakers showing up at my studio in San Francisco, and it's been a great run, and I hope it goes on a long time still. I'm talking to you here, not from San Francisco, but from my loft in Madrid, Spain. So that's a very exciting and different change. Yes, I come from an artisanal background and also from comparative literature. I didn't study fine arts. And I think that this use of strange materials and bookbinding, leather, and other things has absolutely informed the way I work, because I see things both in a large way, like a macrocosm, but also I'm very detail oriented with craft and with materials sort of at a molecular level. So yes, I think craft is definitely informed in work.
I forgot the comparative literature side, and I know that you have published work on Hugo Ball and early Dada and Cabaret Voltaire, and your work reflects an interest in history and the history of who we are and how that has made us. But I feel like these new sculptures, these ceramics, both materially and subject-wise, really explore new territory. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that just to jump in with the comparative literature thing, it's also very much my work is about narrative, not in the sense that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, but that storytelling and kind of reading a story is inherent in the work. So even when I'm doing something that's seemingly abstract, it sort of has the flow of a narrative, of a story. There's always kind of an intention behind it that either is being informed by mythology or politics or personal human feeling or whatever. For these, the ceramics are kind of new for me because I started doing them in the confinement. Because a neighbor whose house didn't have sufficient electricity gave me the kiln. And there we were in confinement, and I'd always wanted to be doing something with ceramic. And sort of like a theme born from the head of Zeus, these things started coming out just really automatically mature, finished almost immediately as I started making ceramics. So I didn't do tests and test runs and color tests like a lot of other ceramicists do. And maybe that's because I already work in pastel and drawing and on canvas and leather and with bookbinding and with porcelain. And so it just came naturally as an artist using another material, not as a big, heavy investigation in ceramics itself. And that's partly why in these sculptures, there's also other elements that include wood, that include ivory, that include encaustic, which is a kind of wax, melted wax paint with resin in it. Because for me, it's not like I'm now a ceramicist. It was simply a tool and a medium to make these sculptures. In addition, for me, if you're asking like about what the quote narrative might be in these works that are behind you, I a little bit felt like when something's floating in the ocean, how it just accumulates more baggage as it goes through. Something can hook onto it and come to life. Another thing can grab onto it. A bit of plant can start growing. And that we kind of are this flotsam and jetsam rolling through, certainly in the time I was making this, rolling through the quarantine experience. So that kind of rolling forward and collecting personality is kind of imbued in those works.
I know one always brings their own perspective to things, and some of the things that I see, I'm sure, are informed by my own experiences, you know, but they make me think a lot about coral and the environmental issues and the death of our coral reefs, and not only about how we carry things through the water, and it's really true with all of the garbage and filling up our oceans, but how our actions across the planet really affect something underwater, you know, thousands of miles away, tens of thousands of miles away. And it's not just sort of the outside environment, but sort of like the organisms inside us humans too. Like, I don't know how you bridge these wide oceans and touch on different parts of an organic atmosphere.
I think first of all, again, to address the way you started the comment, I think that you bringing your own interpretation to the work is something that I, as an artist, absolutely invite. I know not every artist does. I have intentions, I have ideas that are embedded in the work, but I feel that those ideas are in a way my responsibility to carry. And I really appreciate and love when a spectator, when a viewer feels free and doesn't feel threatened to bring their own interpretations to the work they're seeing, because there is no right or wrong. What you're feeling when you look at a work is absolutely validated and absolutely acceptable to me as an artist. And I think that those ideas kind of go into the spirit of the object, if you will, that the object kind of has this life. And so these pieces are kind of a catch-all, again, sort of a net in the sea that kind of can catch everything. And it's absolutely correct for you to bring your ideas, or anybody else, the collector, the viewer, the student who's going through with their teacher. So I think that the work itself is quite open-ended. In terms of how I can grab everything that's both internal and external, I'll relate it to your coral metaphor with a story, because narrative is involved. I had a diving accident about 15 years ago, and I was very ill from a point of infection, and they never found out what it was. And we think that it was actually a coral that had that didn't want to be touched. And she didn't cut me, and I had no point of entry, but I got extremely ill. And the doctors at the time told me that they gave me a lot of antibiotics. I was in the tropical medicine department at the hospital in Barcelona. I was very ill. And they told me that they could give me all these antibiotics, but that antibiotics were like a net, yeah? And they only could catch the things that they knew how to catch. And so they could catch maybe 35 or 40 different microbes that we understood, but there were possibly thousands, if not tens of thousands, of elements and life forms out there that would simply slide through the net. And they just give you antibiotics in the hope that it will catch something, that it can understand. So I think when we talk about like the internal and the external, the planetary, but also the very personal, as well as the destruction of coral in an environmental sense. So again, it all folds back onto the experience of the quarantine, yeah, and what we're living through today. And also the pieces simply are from what's inside me out. So and that itself is a kind of regurgitation, yeah?
And then the objects themselves in their own life, being ceramic, have their own fragility. And we shipped them from Madrid to Columbus, and they arrived beautifully, fortunately. But they do, you know, ceramics are fragile and need to be cared for, shouldn't be touched like coral, really. Right. And the materials, there are also little hidden surprises in them. There's a little gold leaf in part of the wood. And
exactly. So, and I used ivory, but it's not endangered ivory. It's from an old piano where I repurposed the keys from 19th century piano that was in a country house here in Spain. The fragility issue is also really important because if you think about it, ceramics is also something that has to kind of go through a great heat. So it's almost like going into a furnace or going into a kind of a hell. And yet it comes out not burnt, but it comes out more alive and more stable. And I'm really interested in this idea of this kind of human passage that goes into a fire, that comes out kind of reborn. So it's a little bit of a phoenix metaphor as well. All of these things, you know, all of these things get overlaid onto these works without a viewer being wrong or right. It's all there.
It is, and I've had the privilege of living with your art for many years, and it's true how they continue to sort of feed you and, you know, tickle your mind a little bit here and there, and not only the beauty of the materials and the objects, but you sometimes reflect a little differently on something, and maybe it responds to the environment, you know, political or you know, historically at different times in different ways. So they live well.
Not so specifically these works, but there are a lot of other works that deal sort of with the human condition and deal with this idea of what's right and what's wrong and how we pass through things, you know. And I'm a firm believer when you say that you keep reading new things into work of mine that you've been living with. I feel very strongly, as you know, that artists have kind of a responsibility in society, and that akin to a kind of older tradition, we as artists have a role in the community. So just like you would have a rabbi or a priest or a nurse or a doctor or a school teacher, be not a person of authority, but a person who can help guide the community. I believe that for artists, we have a role to help explain what the viewer himself can't find answers for. So sometimes, you know, when you don't understand what the violence is that's going on in a particular riot or a particular political moment, it's not the artist's job to answer that question, but it's the artist's job to shoulder the responsibility to process all of that, to help the rest of the people in the community understand how to deal with what's going on in the world around us. And we're in a very volatile moment right now. And I think that even these pieces behind you, while it may be a vague connection, are kind of helping to answer some questions, helping to find a way out. How do you feel? Oh, I feel like this. And these pieces can express that.
I don't know how vague the connection is. We're living in the middle of a pandemic, the COVID pandemic, where an organism has affected the entire planet worth of human beings. It's changed the way we live, the way I have my mask right here. I'm 6 feet away, more than, you know, I'm the only one in the room. So we're talking over Zoom. It's changed our experiences, and the source of it hasn't been revealed explicitly, but we know it's through an environmental cross connection that shouldn't have happened. You know, that these are things that do upset the organisms and the way we breathe and live within our society. Your work has always done this for me in a way to, even though it may be specifically relating to a moment in history or time, it sort of reveals the stories in a way that connect our own experiences and why things matter.
These objects can function, of course, decoratively. They're both very beautiful when you're close to them, but also kind of repulsive, but you're drawn to them. I don't want to call them COVID art, because I think that would be wrong, but maybe addressing what we were talking about. When you're living in this moment and you don't really understand why, like, what the heck is this? And not what does this microbe look like, but what does it make me feel like? And what are my fears? And is there even beauty in it, or is it only horrifying? And how do I like articulate what that feeling is? Then it's up to me in these objects to articulate. It doesn't answer any question for the viewer, but it can help you look at it and think, wow, that's how I feel. That's what we're living through. Or that's what made my mother sick. Or that's what I'm afraid of. But also, we are living in a world with this problem, and we also have to learn to cohabit with this world, with this microbe, with everything else. So I don't want to say that these are depictions of COVID, because they're not, but they absolutely, not at all, but they absolutely came out of that thinking of, what is this?
Well, once again, I don't think that these were born out of COVID. You've been addressing these issues in your work for a good while. So no, absolutely, these aren't new subjects for you. You've been addressing these works in your skins, in the leather panels, in your drawings, and we actually showed them here in Columbus years ago. So it's not new, and COVID is just a symptom of a larger problem we have.
For me, the objects, were just like, what's happening in the world right this second was just sort of a hanger in the closet to perch ideas onto. So again, it's not about those things. They very much tie into work about monsters and toys and neuroses, and as well undersea landscapes that are gorgeous. So I want to really stress that these are not specific objects so much as that they're perches, they're rolling flotsam and phosphorescent. And the glazes make it possible for dark things to be seen light and light things to be seen dark, and to have a kind of fluorescence, a kind of illumination. And yeah, I'm putting a lot of things onto this. Another way of saying it is that it's a kind of liberty to make these after 30 years, because it's a new material that has new boundaries that I can work very, very free within those boundaries, without constraints of other media that I'm more accustomed to.
Well, I love the way you reinvent yourself year after year, and the work, it continues to sort of blossom and grow organically. So it's such a thrill to have them, and it's so fun to talk to you.
Thank you for the honor, Becca. I love your gallery. I love everything you've been doing, your aesthetic, your joy, the way you interact with your own community, and not really help educate people, but just help bring people to a new place and a new understanding around art. Has just always been so reinforcing in a positive and wonderful way. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so thank you. The exhibition is on through April 15th, and we'll have works online as well. And the URL and the IRL are blending together.
All right.